I was recently talking to a very sweet lady who's doing a story on the differences between our church and our pursuit to our fight to end abortion by equal protection as Christians with the gospel, all of that, and the pro-life establishment and how they're doing it. And you know, one of the things that I was talking to her about was the fact that you know, the Christian church used to own and run and excel in education.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize that government schools, public schools, are really a newcomer in a sense in American history.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, education was private. Education was distinctly Christian. And we were doing dang good with it. I mean, no, seriously. I mean, if you think about like the things that homeschooling and Christian education and classical Christian education, all that stuff produced, like it produced some heavy hitters in history.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, you name your heroes in American history and they were Christian schooled, homeschooled, classical Christian education, all of that. And so we did a pretty good job. Our literacy rates were amazing. And people at the time when they were trying to say, let's do government education and have the government run the school system, there were pastors and Christians then saying this will be the fast track to atheism and the destruction of our nation, the morality of our nation. This will be the fast track to it. If you give the government, the state, the job to do this, it means the end of our nation. And
the state was like, exactly.
Yeah.
But you look at it and you're like, well, they weren't far from the truth at all because, I mean, what have we produced? We have some of the most abysmal figures when it comes to literacy in our nation and education. And we have produced, just in the last generation, a generation of human beings in the West who actually think that there is no meaning, no purpose, that I just crawled out of the soup like the rest of humanity. There's no ultimate ought to do anything in the world. Sexual ethics don't matter. I mean, you can pretty much do whatever your passions and lusts lead you to, all of that. And so, you know, those pastors, they had a point. They had a point. Let's just say that Christian education, we do it better. And can I just say this, and I don't mean this in any way, and listen, we have to be careful right now. Can I just say this? And I don't want to talk down to anybody, so don't take this as that. Like, this is me, like, remarking also to myself. Like, we have to be so careful not to use moments like this, like the left does, to simply get on their soapbox and neglect the pain people are going through. So I'm gonna be careful, but I have to say it because it's a moment where you sort of have to speak to it. Like, are we going to say anything that's helpful? Or are we just going to give platitudes, all the rest? Well, here's something helpful, I think. Okay, get your kids out of government schools.
Yeah.
Where are all these murders taking place? Where are all these murderous shooting sprees taking place? Just think about the last 25 years, for goodness sakes. Think about Columbine. Think about all the way down the line, Sandy Hook, and everything that's taken place to this moment in Texas, and ask yourself a question. Where is it taking place all the time? Mm-hmm. It's in the place where we've made these children shooting ducks. No defense, no real protection, no guard, and we have, you know, rules like this is a gun-free zone. Apparently not always, though, right? It's a gun-free zone, which sort of is like a sign to the murderer on a rampage. Here is where all the victims be. Here is where they reside. This is where I get them.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because kind of the reason why I brought up authority is because when you acknowledge authority, what you're acknowledging is that there are people that need to have authority over them, which means you're acknowledging that some people are vulnerable and need protection. And you'll see a total amazing pattern of God. Wherever God sets up authority, you'll find that in response to someone who's vulnerable and who needs to be protected.
Yeah.
And that applies especially to young kids. I mean, there is this, we're talking about having the ability to justify grief and have a coherent, logical reason behind it. But there's also a reason why anyone can look at this situation and gasp and cry. And it's because we've given up a lot of ground to this sort of like neutral, scientific middle. But the point is that God's design is obvious. Like, it's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
It's obvious in the situation of abortion. It's obvious in the situation of little children being killed. It's not just a denial of their imaging God. There is something totally unnatural about especially a man coming in and terrorizing vulnerable young people. Yeah. And that's obvious. It's obvious. And you can absolutely feel, you don't, if there's anything I feel like I've learned over the last 10 years, it's that I don't need to have some sort of scientific study behind that. It's obvious. If you want to pretend like it's not obvious or there's some nuance here or whatever, if you want to redefine what the word vulnerable means or what authority means, that's cool. But it's just written on our hearts. We know it. We know it deeply.
Yeah. Well, I don't, not to get too far off track, but just to solidify your point, the gun-free zones and all that, and our kids being unprotected. Like, I don't think people even realize how bad it really is. So even here in Arizona, we have some of the most constitutional gun laws in the state, right? Or in the country, I mean. Even with Demas's approval to carry a firearm, if I was to get pulled over driving through a school zone and I have a gun on me, I can be in trouble for being in that school zone with a gun, even with a permit. Mm-hmm. But the point is, so say we were there in Uvalde and you were to run in with your firearm and stop this guy from being evil, you could still be in trouble for carrying a firearm into a school zone, even though you're using that tool appropriately.
Technically, because the way the laws are set.
And that's my point. Is like they're
Yeah.
Like you're talking about sitting ducks and stuff. That's how awful these situations truly are. And I don't think people really realize it. So.
Yeah. And so 2 points there. And again, I want to be very cautious to the person that may be watching this that actually has had their child killed in this situation. I please hear me on this. This is trying to give a Christian response in terms of, okay, how do we stop this? How do we fix it? Like in a way that is biblical, reasonable. And I think you have to think in 2 terms, like get your children out of government schools immediately. One is worldview. They're discipling your kids, period. And stop being like me before I started homeschooling my kids and saying things like, I'm going to send them as missionaries. How's that worked out for you? And they're not called to do that. In terms of like as a child, it's your job to disciple them and educate them, not to send them out unprepared into the world to be discipled by somebody else. And let's be honest, you are not getting the amount of discipleship time with your child that your teachers are in the public school, right? Are you going to match the 7 hours a day they're doing 5 days a week? You're going to match that with discipleship? No, you're not.
You can't. It hasn't. We've been saying that long enough that we would be seeing some fruit of that by now. Right. And we have not.
No, the culture and the public education system is doing a better job of discipling our kids than we are.
And they are intentionally doing it.
Yes.
This is the myth of neutrality.
Right.
We think that because it's out in the public square that it is obligated to be neutral. Mm-hmm. But the state is educating your child with their religion. Yes. It is a religious act.
Yes, it's an antithetical worldview. Like, what is religion fundamentally? This is just, again, fundamentally. It is the propagation of an ultimate, right? Ultimate. And it's an ethical system, right? Like it's at least that. I mean, there's also stuff in here you can say, like a view of origins and all the rest. So yeah, when you go to a school like this, your child is getting a religious education. They're being told what is ultimate and how they ought to live their lives, right? So that's very religious, and we need to consider that. So the first thing I want to say in terms of like, how do you correct this for Christian families in the future? Number one, worldview issues. Get your child out of government schools immediately. Stop letting your child be discipled by the state. Take our kids away from the state and an antithetical worldview to the Christian worldview and the gospel itself. The next thing is, if you want to correct this, I would say get your children out of the school. Why? Because clearly they can't protect them. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm saying that, trying to be so sensitive to the people who may see this and may be hurting in Texas right now. I don't mean this to indict you. I'm saying if we're going to heal from this and get out of this, fix the problem at the root of it. They are not protected in government schools. Those are gun-free zones. If your child is at home with you, you have the ability yourself to protect them. We're armed to the teeth in my house, okay? And my whole family knows how to use the guns. And so my family is protected in my home. But also, if you pick a Christian school or a private Christian education school, you can actually entrust those people, ask questions. What are you doing to protect my kid? Mm-hmm. Who do you have here to guard them? And do they have weapons? And show me how you make sure you keep this place secure all the time. And you know what? If you don't do it, I'm not going to pay you. Right? It's a business, and it's a business. And so businesses, to operate and to do well, they have to be competitive, right? And if they're going to get your dollars, you have to entrust them with your child. And if you don't trust them, you will not entrust them with your child. And so get your children out of government schools, because they've demonstrated over decades they cannot protect your children. One of the things that, and I'm just mentioning the name because I just saw it come up in response to Texas shooting. One thing that Ted Cruz had said when he was responding to Texas shooting, he was like, "Look," he said, "we've got to fix this." He said, "I tried to fix this years ago, like I think he said 10 years ago or something like that." He said, "I put a bill in that would have taken money we had available to go to public schools across the country that would have actually like put armed policemen in the schools, and like, you know, rules in place and bulletproof windows and all that stuff." He said that they just filibustered it. They didn't want the actual protection. So like, to think about that, like maybe if they had done that. Now, I don't agree with the government schools and that sort of a thing, but you know, I do want these kids to survive. So until that all happens, until we get a proper view of education and better education in our country, I do want these kids protected. And so like, they're demonstrating to you, we don't value the lives of your children enough to actually say we must have them protected. Gun-free zones are not always gun-free zones. They're not, because when these murderers come in to do these rampages, they're the ones with the guns, and everyone else is a victim. That's just where we're putting these kids. So get your kids out of government schools. Get them out as soon as you can.